Kash Patel and Sheldon Whitehouse were never supposed to collide like this, but the moment they did, it sent a shock through Washington that still hasn't settled. It wasn't just another tense exchange, and it wasn't one of those routine political skirmishes that vanishes the moment the cameras shut off. This was different. This was the kind of moment where you feel the air change, where one man's confidence crashes straight into another man's determination to expose what he believed was a carefully built illusion. And when Whitehouse leaned in, looked Patel in the eye, and systematically tore through the story Patel had been selling to the country, you could practically feel the room shift.
Chairman, let me start by disagreeing with the notion that what took place with respect to the cases against President Trump was weaponization. I know that's the Republican theory of the case, but the other reason why the FBI and the Department of Justice would investigate Trump for crimes is because Trump was doing crimes, and there was adequate predication to pursue investigation of those crimes. And indeed, in every case that I'm aware of in which those cases were allowed to go to judgment, the president was convicted. So we can't allow the weaponization narrative to just remove the notion that the guy was investigated and prosecuted for crimes because he did the crimes. Once you start with the notion that Trump is not a criminal but a victim, you then have to invent the conspiracy that victimized him. And once you've propagated that conspiracy, you then have to find who the conspirators are. So then you have to go after FBI agents and DOJ folks in order to prop up that theory. The way that ended in Soviet Russia was with show trials of the individuals who were allegedly in the conspiracy. The way that ends in Trump's America is with agents and prosecutors forced out in mass purges that may well, as the ranking member Durbin has pointed out, been driven by Kash Patel as a private citizen. So starting with that point, there are three reasons why Kash Patel is extremely dangerous. One is all of his wild MAGA behavior. This is a guy whose judgment is beyond questionable. It's appallingly bad. We have a lot of quarrel about whether his enemies list is an enemies list and whether we're smearing the guy by saying that his enemies list is an enemies list. Here's what he said about it. He showed his enemies list and said, "The manhunt starts tomorrow." If they're not your enemies, why would you start a manhunt against them? He called them the criminals themselves and showed a picture of his enemies list. If criminals aren't your enemies, as head of the FBI, who are? He retweeted a video showing him chainsawing the heads off of people on his enemies list. If you're chainsawing the heads off of people, are they not your enemies? So the invention that this is not an enemies list requires people to go into just fantasy land. And these are his own statements. These aren't our accusations. These are Patel's own words. Going after people in the media, impeaching judges who disagree with us, shutting down the FBI Hoover building, on and on and on. This guy is a flagrant extremist with appallingly bad judgment. Second point, we don't know enough about this mischief yet. There are real open questions. We've never in this committee had a person come for a serious senior law enforcement position who had testified in a grand jury criminal matter, and we don't know what he testified about. He's entitled to tell us. That's basic grand jury Rule 6E law. But this side of the committee is completely covering that up. We have absolutely no statement from Patel about what his grand jury testimony was. And he's at liberty to give that to us. He just won't. And Republicans won't tell him to. So he gets away with it. He pled the fifth. You don't get to plead the fifth without a real and genuine concern that you can be prosecuted for a crime. What crime? We're entitled to know. We've never had somebody come through this committee for a high senior law enforcement position who had pled the fifth. He's got the right to do that, of course. We've got the right to know. And by the way, when he exercises the right to do that in a civil proceeding, That entitles the jury to draw the adverse inference that what he is covering up in the civil proceeding with his Fifth Amendment assertion is against his interests. A judge will instruct a jury about that adverse interest, and we're not supposed to draw an adverse interest in this committee when we're not told about his Fifth Amendment assertion. There's all this weird stuff that's come up since about investments in Chinese companies in the Cayman Islands vesting while he will be FBI director. If the guy is supposed to be investigating Chinese intrusion into our intelligence faculties, if we're trying to investigate Chinese fentanyl trafficking into our country, why do we want an FBI director who is somewhere between $1 and $5 million into a Chinese company through a Cayman Islands shell? And then there are the Russia connections. I'll get to those at the end. We don't have to, where everybody's fond of saying these are Democratic smears. Actually, go to the Trump appointees who worked with this guy. What are they warning us? They're warning us, Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. That's some recommendation from a colleague. His deputy, Charles Kupperman. Patel's ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job, untrustworthy, an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature. Definitely you want that on your resume by way of a recommendation from a former supervisor. Attorney General Barr said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to be the deputy director of the FBI, and now he's back as the director of the FBI. And Trump's CIA director, Gina Haspel, threatened to resign rather than allow this guy into her office as her deputy. And if you go beyond the Trump appointees who are warning us about this guy, you can go to the last time he testified in court, which was in Colorado, and here's what the court found about him. That Patel was not a credible witness, that his testimony was illogical, and it was completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, I've been an attorney general, and I've been a United States attorney, and I've put state police troopers on the stand, and I've put FBI agents on the stand. If at the end of a case, a judge made findings like this about a law enforcement witness that I put on the stand, there would be follow-up. I would want an explanation of why this witness was so incredible that findings like that were made by the judge. It would be a significant issue with respect to that witness's continued performance in office. And here's a guy who's been found to be completely incredible by a judge in his testimony, and we're acting as if that's nothing. That's not Democrats. That's a judge in Colorado. So the last thing I'll say is I think we need to begin to prepare ourselves for Trump-Russia 2.0. The Trump-Russia thing was, I'm not going to go back all over it, fully ventilated in the Senate Bipartisan Intelligence Report, in the Mueller report. Trump-Russia was a thing. We stopped talking about it, but Trump kept talking about it and saying it was a hoax. Trump-Russia hoax, Trump-Russia hoax. No, it was not a hoax. It was real. It was there. There's a record. Part of it was bipartisan work. Some of it was done in the House. There was an abundance of evidence about the Trump-Russia connection. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing Patel coming in, who says he wants to wreck the FBI's what he called intel shop, which is the part of the FBI that looks at Russia and does counterintelligence work against Russia. He said that he wants to close out the D.C. office and send everybody out into the field. Well, it's the D.C. office, not the field offices, that do the counterintelligence work. You want to shut it down? You're opening your arms to Russian intelligence operations. You go just across to the Attorney General's office, and there's Attorney General Bondi. What's the first thing she does when she gets in? Closes all the kleptocrature and kleptocracy investigation offices of the Department of Justice. Gee, who are they pursuing? Putin and his oligarchs. You shut down the group that has successfully grabbed assets off Putin's crooked oligarchs. What a signal that is. And then look at Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not going to go through the whole length of her Russia associations, but let's just say that a Russian news media editorial said that her appointment should cause the CIA and the FBI to tremble because she was a friend to Russia. Who defends us against Russian intelligence operations and Russia's criminal operations in the United States? It's the FBI, it's the Department of Justice, and it's our intelligence community. The people in charge of each one have sent powerful signals that they are shutting down our defenses when it comes to Russia. And we're about to head to the Munich Security Conference, where we are seeing Mr. Art of the Deal and his operatives giving away every piece of leverage that we have over Putin with respect to Ukraine. It is unilateral disarmament to throw Ukraine under the bus and give Putin what he wants. So mark my words. This Patel guy will come back to haunt you. Every piece of evidence shows that, and it is not Democrat evidence. It's his own words, it's his own colleagues, and it's judges evaluating his credibility. And Trump, Russia is going to come roaring back if it's not already back. We should.
Because what he revealed wasn't just a lie. It was a blueprint of how power bends truth, bends institutions, and bends the very idea of accountability. And the moment he started speaking, you could tell Patel was sitting in front of a storm he never expected. You see, Whitehouse wasn't just challenging a statement. He was challenging an entire narrative. He was challenging the idea that someone could walk into the halls of power, raise their right hand, swear an oath, and still think they could get away with spinning a tale built on half-truths and strategic omissions. From the very first words out of his mouth, he made it clear he wasn't buying the storyline that Patel and his defenders had been pushing, that the investigations surrounding a former president were some grand political attack, some orchestrated assault on innocence. Whitehouse cut straight through that. He said what many had quietly believed for years, but very few had dared to say out loud. Investigations happen because there's something to investigate. Cases go to trial because there's evidence. Convictions happen because juries saw enough to decide guilt. And pretending otherwise requires building an entire universe where facts don't exist and only victimhood does. And that's where Patel came in, not as a neutral figure, not as a law enforcement guardian of truth, but as the man willing to twist the system in ways that supported that fantasy. Whitehouse laid it out clearly. Once you start insisting someone is a victim instead of accountable, you need villains. And when you need villains, you start hunting for them wherever you can, in the FBI, in the DOJ, in the intelligence agencies. Suddenly, career agents become conspirators, prosecutors become enemies, and the people who spent decades protecting national security are treated like obstacles standing in the way of a political story. This wasn't some vague warning. Whitehouse compared it to the darkest kinds of purges in history, not because he wanted drama, but because the pattern was unmistakable. Patel wasn't just part of the pattern. Whitehouse argued he was driving it, and once he said that, the floodgates opened. Whitehouse began detailing why Patel's rise to power wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. Dangerous because of his online rhetoric, dangerous because of his inflammatory behavior, dangerous because of the way he weaponized imagery that no one in a serious law enforcement role would ever touch. He brought up the enemies list, the one Patel himself showed off while declaring a manhunt starts tomorrow. Not metaphorically, not jokingly, directly. He reminded the room that Patel publicly referred to the people on that list as criminals and even shared a video of a chainsaw ripping through faces representing journalists and political figures. And when someone displays that combination of power and hostility, pretending those people aren't their enemies becomes almost impossible. Whitehouse didn't have to exaggerate. Patel's own words were the evidence. But then came the part that made even Patel's defenders shift uncomfortably. Whitehouse highlighted something that almost never happens in the Senate Judiciary Committee, a nominee invoking the Fifth Amendment in a civil case. It wasn't illegal, but it raised questions no one could ignore. Whitehouse emphasized that a person only invokes the Fifth when they fear incriminating themselves. And while the courtroom respects that, the Senate still has a right to know why the potential head of the FBI felt he needed to protect himself from criminal exposure. That wasn't normal. It wasn't routine. It was a flashing red light. And then there was the mystery around Patel's grand jury testimony. Patel had claimed he couldn't discuss it because of a supposed court order. It sounded official, it sounded serious, and many people might have believed it. Except the judge he referenced had already made it clear no such limitation existed. Under the law, witnesses can always share their own testimony. There was no secrecy requirement, no gag order, nothing binding Patel's hands. Whitehouse laid that out with precision, calmly but unmistakably identifying the lie. And when Patel later changed his story, claiming the testimony had already been released, again, something that simply wasn't true, it only deepened the hole. Suddenly, it wasn't one misstatement. It wasn't one misunderstanding. It looked like a pattern of avoidance, a pattern of trying to run from something that might have been damaging. And Whitehouse wasn't about to let that go. But he didn't stop with legal contradictions. He started peeling back other layers. layers involving finances, foreign ties, and investments that, according to reports, connected Patel to a Chinese company through a Cayman Island structure. Now, to the average person, that might sound like just another complicated money detail, but White House made the implications clear. The FBI deals with Chinese intelligence threats constantly. They track fentanyl trafficking, espionage activity, cyber intrusions. If the man leading that agency was financially tied, directly or indirectly, to foreign entities, that wasn't just a conflict. It was a risk, a massive one. And it didn't help that some of the strongest warnings about Patel weren't coming from Democrats. They were coming from the very people he once worked beside. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton said he didn't think Patel was qualified and only hired him because he was forced to. Deputy Charles Kupperman called Patel's ideas ludicrous, labeled him untrustworthy, and said it was a disgrace to even consider him for high office. Bill Barr said Patel had virtually no experience for the job. CIA Director Gina Haspel reportedly threatened to resign rather than let Patel into her office. These weren't casual threats. They were career-defining red flags. And then White House brought up something that stunned the room. A judge in Colorado had once ruled that Patel's testimony in a case was not credible, so lacking in evidence and logic that the judge essentially dismissed it outright. In the world of law enforcement, credibility is currency. If a judge openly says a witness is unbelievable, that's not something you forget. That's not something you ignore. It would normally trigger reviews, internal investigations, even disciplinary action. But instead, Patel was being considered for one of the highest law enforcement roles in the country. That alone would have been enough to shake the room. But White House wasn't done. That he turned to something that most people assumed was settled long ago: the question of Russian interference. Not the memes, not the slogans. The actual facts laid out in bipartisan Senate reports and the Mueller investigation. White House warned that while the country had moved on, Patel had not. Patel had embraced the narrative that the entire thing was a hoax, but according to White House, the evidence never supported that. He pointed out that Patel had stated he wanted to dismantle the FBI's intel shop, the same unit responsible for tracking Russian intelligence operations. And dismantling that office wouldn't just reduce bureaucracy. It would open the door, wide and unguarded, for foreign activity. White House drew a straight line, from Patel's hostility toward key intelligence functions to the DOJ shutting down teams that targeted kleptocracy activity tied to Russian oligarchs, to public praise of individuals with concerning ties or praise from Russian media. He wasn't saying it was proof. He wasn't claiming a conspiracy. He was saying the signals were impossible to ignore. And when you connect signals, patterns start to form. That was his warning, that the country might be walking straight back into a vulnerability it already lived through once. By the time White House finished speaking, the room was silent in a way that didn't feel accidental. It felt like the weight of everything he laid out had landed hard. This wasn't the usual back and forth of partisan debate. This was a senator saying, with clarity and evidence, that the person sitting in front of them posed a deeper danger than most people realized. And it wasn't because of politics. It was because of behavior, contradictions, exposure to foreign influence, and a history of bending facts until they broke. And the most troubling part? These weren't accusations built from opposition research or partisan talking points. As White House emphasized, these were Patel's own statements, Patel's own contradictions, judges' rulings, and officials' warnings. When the hearing ended, no one needed to ask whether this moment would matter. It already did. The question was no longer whether Patel told the truth. The question became what kind of government we live in if truth can be bent so easily in the first place. White House's words hung in the air as a reminder that institutions don't crumble all at once. They crack slowly, quietly, under the weight of people who think accountability is optional. Because when someone at the top of law enforcement feels comfortable misleading the Senate, the danger isn't just the lie. It's the normalization of lying. It's the idea that oversight is a performance, not a safeguard. It's the idea that power answers to nothing, not law, not truth, not the people it serves. And that's why the moment between Kash Patel and Sheldon Whitehouse matters. It's not just about exposing contradictions. It's about exposing a shift in what power believes it can get away with. It's a warning with a simple message. If truth stops being a requirement, democracy stops being a guaranteed. If you want breakdowns that cut through noise, expose what's really happening. and follow the stories that powerful people hope you'll forget. Make sure you subscribe, share, and stay tuned. There's more to uncover, and together, we're not letting any of it disappear.